I'm Granny Charlotte. Welcome back to Granny Charlotte's Adventure Stories. Today we're reading Chapter 15 of Little Pilgrim's Progress. But first we have 4 vocabulary words today. So listen up, they're going to be in our reading. Our first word is despair. Despair means all loss of hope, a thinking or a feeling that things will never change or get better. Despair. The next word is doubting. Doubting means you are not willing to believe something is true or will still happen. Doubting. And here's a fellow we'll meet on the way. His name is overconfident. It means trusting in your own thinking too much. And here's an odd word. I even had to look this one up. It's called stile. And this stile is a kind of ladder built so that people can get over fences out in the country, but the animals, like the cows or the pigs, are not able to cross that fence. It's just for people. It's called a stile. And I have a picture of that. Let me show that to you. So this is a picture of a stile. You see the girl going over the fence and the young boy helping her over. There's kind of a ladder there, but obviously an animal couldn't do that. And so when we come to that word today in our reading, you'll know they're climbing over a fence. Stile. Thank you. Here we go, Chapter 15. The little pilgrims left the Valley of Peace early in the morning and traveled along the way of the king all that day. Late in the afternoon, they came to a place where a stile led into a broad green meadow. It was called Bypath Meadow, and it belonged to a cruel and powerful giant named Despair. He was one of the most famous soldiers in the wicked prince's army, and he lived in a strong castle beyond the meadow, which could not be seen from the way of the king. This was all written down in Christian's book, but he did not think of looking at it just then. The boys were both feeling very tired. They had found the path leading from the river rough and stony, and their feet were sore and aching. Christian stopped when he saw the stile and leaned over it. A fence divided the meadow from the way of the king, but a smooth grassy path ran close to it. And here is our picture of a stile again. Right there. That's what they're crossing. Could we not walk along this path for a little way, he said, turning to Hopeful. The stones are so hard and my feet ache dreadfully. So do mine, answered Hopeful, but would it be safe? Then he came to the stile also and looked over. Oh, I think it must be, said Christian. See, it runs close to the fence. We could climb back again anywhere in a minute. Hopeful did not feel quite sure that they were doing right. But as he thought that Christian knew more about the king's laws than he did, he followed his companion into the meadow. The grass was soft and pleasant to their sore feet, and not far behind them another boy was walking along near to the fence. Christian called to him, saying, "Can you tell us where this path leads to?" The boy, whose name was Overconfidence, turned round and replied, "To the Celestial City." "You see," said Christian, "I was right. We shall be quite safe. We can keep behind that boy, and then, if there's any danger, we shall know of it in time to escape." But Hopeful was not satisfied, and when the night came on and the shadows grew so thick that the figure of Overconfidence could no longer be seen, he felt frightened. Suddenly a cry was heard and a sound of falling. "Oh!" Hopeful seized Christian's arm and clung to him in great fear, and Christian too lost his courage and began to tremble from head to foot. What could have happened, he said, and he called again to overconfidence, but he received no answer. Only through the darkness, the boys could hear that someone was groaning as if in terrible pain. I am sure we are not in the right way, said Hopeful, and it is so dark. Christian did not answer. He knew now that he had done wrong in climbing over the stile, and he wondered how he could have been so foolish as to think that any path could be safe that led him out of the straight road. But before he could speak again, he felt some heavy drops of rain upon his face. Then a bright flash of lightning darted across the sky, and a roar of thunder followed. The rain poured in torrents, and the thunder and lightning were more fearful than any which they had heard or seen before. Christian began to cry and wish that he'd not been so careless. It was my fault, he said. Oh, Hopeful, I am so sorry. I deserve to be killed, but you would never have come if I had not persuaded you. I might have, said Hopeful, not liking to hear poor Christian's sobs. Don't cry, Christian. It was my fault too, because I didn't try to prevent your coming. Let us turn back, said Christian. Perhaps we can find our way. By this time, the heavy rain had filled the little streams that ran through the meadow, and the path by the fence was flooded. The water was so deep that the boys could scarcely keep their footing, and they began to fear that they would never get back into the way of the king. The storm lasted for many hours, and although Christian and Hopeful struggled on bravely, they soon found that it would not be possible to make their way to the stile in the darkness. So at last they crouched down together in a little sheltered corner close to the fence, meaning to watch for the first gleam of daylight and then hasten on their way. But they were both worn out with fright and weariness, and before the morning came, they fell asleep. The storm passed before daybreak, and the sun rose in a clear sky and shone brightly over the way of the king. Christian and Hopeful were lying under the shadow of the fence and did not feel the warmth of the sunshine. So, instead of making their way back to the stile in the early morning, as they had intended to do, they slept soundly and knew nothing of the danger that was close at hand. Giant Despair had heard the storm raging, and he came down from his castle soon after sunrise and walked through his fields and meadows to see if any harm had been done by the wind and the rain. Last of all, he crossed Bypath Meadow, and on his way home passed by the very spot where the little pilgrims were sleeping. Hopeful's dress, which had once been white and new, had become soiled and shabby while he stayed in Vanity Fair. But Christian's armor still looked bright, although it was sadly splashed with the mud through which he had walked the night before. The giant caught sight of his shining helmet among the bushes by the fence, and he turned at once to see who was lying there. "They are pilgrims of the king," he said to himself, and he smiled to think they were in his power. A loud voice roused Christian from his dreams, and when he opened his eyes, he saw the giant stooping over him. Despair was a terrible-looking man with shaggy hair and beard and clothes made of the rough skins of wild beasts. Christian cried out with fear when he saw him, and this roused Hopeful, who sprang up trembling. "What are you doing here?" said the giant. "We are pilgrims," answered Christian, whose lips were quivering so that he could scarcely speak, and we have lost our way." "You have no right to sleep in my meadow," said the giant, and his voice was so harsh and deep that the boys were more frightened by it than they had been by the storm. "I shall take you back with me to my castle." The poor little pilgrims knew that they were quite helpless. If they had tried to run away, the great strong man would have overtaken them in a moment. He drove them before him across the fields to his house, which was called Doubting Castle, and put them into a dark dungeon, locking the door behind him. All day and all night they lay there upon the bare ground, without either food or water, and not even able to see each other. Hopeful crept close to Christian, and they clung together, wondering whether the giant would soon come and put them to death. Christian's heart was very full of grief, because he felt that he had caused all this trouble. And now he feared that the giant would kill them both, and that they would never reach the celestial city. Giant Despair had a wife whose name was Diffidence. He told her that he had found 2 little pilgrims sleeping in his meadow, and that he brought them home and locked them up in one of his dungeons. Diffidence was very pleased to hear this, and being a cruel woman, she said she hoped her husband would beat his little prisoners. So in the morning, the giant took his club and went down to the dungeon. When he had beaten the boys, he left them again in the darkness, and they were so bruised by the heavy blows that they could not move but lay upon the ground all that day, moaning in pain. The next day, Despair visited them again and seemed surprised to find that they were not dead. He told them that he would never let them leave his castle, but that if they did not wish to die for want of food, they might want to drink some poison that he would leave with them. Then Christian begged him to have mercy upon them and to set them free. And this made the giant so angry that he rushed upon them with his club and would have killed them. But his strength suddenly failed, and he was forced to leave them alone. In the bright weather, he often had fits of weakness and lost the use of his hands, so that sometimes the pilgrim who he carried into his castle were able to escape from him. Here's a picture of the giant Despair with the 2 little pilgrims getting ready to beat them again. What a horrible situation to be in. Christian did not know this, and he began to think that it was now foolish to hope for deliverance. "What shall we do?" he said. "If we are to stay here until we die, will it not be better to drink this poison than to die slowly for want of food?" "I am sure we must not do that," said Hopeful. "Perhaps if the giant is ill again, he may forget to lock the door, and we may be able to slip out before his strength comes back. Let us wait a little longer, and the king may show us a way to escape." And that's all our reading for today. I certainly hope Christian and Hopeful get out of that castle. Well, kids, it's time for you to wash your hands, brush your teeth, and eat a nice chip. I keep going back to root beer. I think it's almost one of my favorites. See you next time.